Everyone. I am so excited to be here with you tonight for our second installment, our second regular monthly. Well, actually, this is a double header. This is an extra special night to have you here with us, Lorinda. We're going to do our regular fourth Wednesday of the month next week on Wednesday evening. And tonight, we have the privilege of being able to welcome Lorinda Newton. She's a powerhouse, a homeschool powerhouse, and I am so excited to have her here. Lorinda is a homeschool mom. She has graduated children. She is a blogger. She has organized a library. Is there anything you haven't done, Lorinda? You've done a lot. We love you as a resource. It's really fun to have a place to send people. We are debuting a new format tonight where we are going live with our with our guest speaker, and then at the end of Lorinda's presentation, we are going to invite our participants into a private Q&A that will not be live streamed and will not be recorded, so that you feel comfortable to ask any of the questions that you want to ask Lorinda, or just discuss about homeschool without having to worry about who might be watching, or feeling like you're kind of putting yourselves out there in a way that you don't want to. We are continuing our commitment to provide resources and tools with our 60-minute Parent Power Hour, so that you can have strategy, encouragement, network with other homeschool parents, and be able to have some friends to come alongside you and make this journey with you. Whether you are thinking about homeschooling, you're just starting out, or you're seasoned, we hope that you will take away a little nugget every single time that we get together each month. We would love for you, if you are participating tonight, if you signed up to join our Q&A, to start writing down some questions as Lorinda does her presentation. And I might ask some questions of you, Lorinda, here and there, if there's little things to bring up. But without further ado, Lorinda, I would like to turn the floor over to you. We are very excited to hear what you have to share with us tonight.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background. I live on Whidbey Island, which is about an hour's north of Seattle. And my husband and I have been married for almost 34 years, and we have two kids. I have a degree in English and a certificate in copy editing. And before I was homeschooling, I was a freelance writer, editor, and desktop publisher. And I started homeschooling my kids in 2004, and continued to homeschool under the Washington State home-based education law until 2018. And then I had my kids in a hybrid homeschool private school program for high school. So that categorized our kids as private school kids at that time. And my son graduated in 2018 and my daughter in 2023. And while my kids were in the high school program at Academy Northwest, I blogged for them for about 4 or 5 years. And all those educational posts I have on my Substack now, or most of them have been moved there, under Lorinda's Ponderings in my Substack. And there's a web page on there called Homeschool Resources, where you can find all of those blog posts plus other resources that I have on homeschooling that I've written about. I'm going to start by, how did I choose to homeschool? Since some of you are probably kicking the tires about that. Whenever people asked my husband, why did you choose to homeschool? He would say, because we could. And then he would add, educating your children at home should be your default choice. If you're not able to, then you could delegate the responsibility to a private school. As a last resort, you could surrender your children to the government school system. It's like relying on food stamps. People are expected to earn a living and support themselves and pay for their own food. So parents should direct their child's education. Educating at home was the norm until a little over 100 years ago. The government-run schools were a recent invention. Other factors in our choice was that both of us were bullied in school, and we wanted to avoid that for our kids. But more importantly, as Christ followers, we wanted to instill a biblical worldview in our children. And competing with the government school system's worldview would have made that difficult. And granted, when we started, there wasn't as much junk as there is now. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of how I got started homeschooling. Even though we had planned to homeschool at the beginning, even before we had kids, we did enroll our son in a private Christian school nearby, preschool, because he was an only child at the time. And during that time, I read books on homeschooling and talked to homeschoolers at our large church. There was a large homeschool community where I am, and actually the suburbs of Seattle have a lot of homeschoolers. And one book I started out with was this, The Well-Trained Mind. This is the first edition. There's at least third edition now. And I really fell in love with the classical education method. And I wished I had learned that way. One of the moms I talked to highly recommended that I look into learning styles. And I was a little bit familiar with that because as a freelance writer, I used to write an author column for the Christian Library Journal. And one of the authors I interviewed was educator Cindy Tobias, who lived in the Seattle area. And she's famous for her book, The Way They Learn. Came out, I think, in the 90s. And then a book that the homeschool mom recommended to me was by Howard Gardner, Multiple Intelligences. And I found this book really enlightening because it talked about how kids don't necessarily are academic smart, but some people are musically smart or relationally smart. And this was really helpful also because my son is not very academic, but he's very hands smart. Other books I read that I really liked was The Things We Wish We Had Known. This was put together by some early modern homeschoolers. And it's kind of funny. The editor had a sense of humor. And then one book I found really helpful too is Home Learning Year by Year. And I used this during the K through 8, kind of gauging what kids should know at a certain age. But things are kind of fluid and flexible in homeschooling, so you don't have to stick to a grade. And then as a side note, especially if you have young children at home, prepare them for academics by reading to them. Read to them early and read to them a lot and a variety. We read books to our son even when he was a baby. Hearing a rich vocabulary and various topics will broaden a child's knowledge base of the world on which they can put other ideas on top while they learn. If they don't have that knowledge base, it's really hinders their reading later. We adopted our daughter from India when she was 6 years old. And at the time she knew about 20 words in English and we knew even fewer words in Hindi. But to teach her English besides talking, we started just on day one, reading simple books to her. I got out the toddler books and we worked our way through. And then one thing that Joy asked me to address was, won't I goof up? And my answer is, yes, you will goof up, just like you mess up when you're parenting. I view homeschooling as an extension of parenting. It's not easy, just like parenting isn't easy. I know often you read these rosy stories in magazines or online. I'm going to tell you kind of more of the hard stuff a little bit. You will have bad days. You will yell at your kids, whether they're at home or if you put them on the yellow school bus. Your best designed academic plans will get shipwrecked by sickness, a rebellious child, or a death of a pet, or a death of a loved one. Life happens, and sometimes you need to shelve the academics for a season to deal with life's issues. But that's okay, because you can be flexible. You might reach times where you cry and wonder if all the stress and tears are worth it when your daughter's being hormonal or your son refuses to do his homework because he's got atypical issues, which my son did. It was hard to teach him sometimes. But just as you don't give up on parenting, though sometimes you might want to, you don't give up on home educating your children either. Some people do, but if you really want to make it happen, you work through the hard times. You say, this is a commitment, just like you commit just to raise your children. Granted, sometimes circumstances do arise that you may need to put your child in a classroom setting or some other special setting. Because my son's learning disabilities, we ended up enrolling him in Academy Northwest for high school. As an English major and a professional writer, I had no idea what to do with a son with a writing disability. And they helped me out with that. So when it gets hard, you pray, talk to people, get support, and carry on. You won't ruin your children. And you just keep working on developing the relationship, which is more key than the academics. And eventually you'll see the homeschooling is worth it, especially if you still have a relationship with your kids. Then I'm going to hit on some common objections. A lot of people say, well, I'm not an expert educator. Our society is like stuck on this expert business. Guess what? You're the expert on your child. You taught your child to walk, talk, tie his shoes, and be polite to people. As a home-based educator, you will continue to teach life skills and character development. You will just add academics with that. Even high school dropouts have been successful at educating their kids at home. The key is don't do it alone. Join a support group. Ask friends and family for support when you need it or feel burned out, which you will get to that point sometimes. And often I would reach out to fellow homeschoolers and they would support me in whatever's going on. Another objection is, I don't know all the subjects. Well, you don't have to. You can learn with your child. For example, I knew almost nothing about geology. I didn't have that in school, but in elementary school, my kids were absolutely fascinated by rocks and volcanoes. So I learned about rocks and volcanoes with them. I also used homeschool co-ops and community classes. And for high school, I used Academy Northwest for some of the upper level classes. And my daughter attended Running Start, which is Washington State's dual enrollment program. She just did it 1 year, not 2. Also, some kids can just teach themselves things. And it's amazing what I've heard other homeschool students have done. I know one family, the son's been doing all these certifications for software development, and he's going right into the workforce instead of going to college. You can also hire a tutor. Just this last school year, my husband tutored 2 boys in algebra. And so if you are weak in a subject, you can ask around and find a tutor for your kids. Kind of related, if you goof up, is a big question is, when I mess up my kids, and my question is, would they be better off in a classroom setting? The way the classroom is now, maybe not. As I said, I struggled a lot teaching my kids because they did have learning issues. And when I finally got our son tested when he was 15, the neuropsychologist actually told me that homeschooling was the best choice for him. Having Asperger's, he shuts down in a crowd, and if he ever was in a classroom setting, he probably would have just totally shut down. And so it encouraged me that actually I made the right choice. And then the big question is, what about socialization? A few times I was asked that. I asked another question. What environment best socializes a child? A classroom full of 13-year-olds? Think Lord of the Flies, or a family or a multi-age setting. The only time we ever put with other people just our own age is when you're in a regular school setting. The rest of the time we interact with people of all ages. This age segregation was designed by John Dewey and his progressive disciples. Remember, the one-room schoolhouse offered multi-age instruction, and our country was taught that way for a few centuries. I will add that my extroverted daughter did get lonely at times since we moved to Whidbey Island when she was 10, and there just isn't a lot of kids here. So we had to work hard arranging play dates, sleepovers, and other social activities. And she was a competitive gymnast before we moved, and homeschooling actually helped a lot with that. And also she was a competitive taekwondo person, and homeschooling gave her a lot more flexibility to go to tournaments and things. But in truth, homeschool kids are better socialized than classroom kids because they interact with the world more. Because I didn't have a school to babysit my kids, I had to take them everywhere when I had to go on errands or shopping. My son was known at our local grocery store as the kid who walked around with a book, and they always commented, he must be homeschooled, because he would read a book following me as I pushed the cart around. Okay, now I'm going to get to a summary of how to get started homeschooling yourself. During COVID, I wrote a 3-part document called the Homeschool Roadmap. So I have a little picture here. to help families start their own homeschools. And then in this document, which you can find on my Substack, contains several web links to all kinds of articles and resources. And now I'm going to give you a 10-step summary from that document. First step is to discuss the idea with your family, particularly your spouse or partner. If a couple isn't united on the idea, it won't fly. And also, you need to talk to your older kids. They will probably object, saying, well, I want to be with my friends at school. But you can explain to them they will have time to hang out with their friends during non-school hours. Step 2, learn about homeschooling. I touched on this in the beginning, how I was learning. And in my homeschool roadmap document, I list websites, book lists, magazines, and organizations that you can learn from. I also listed a few resources for special needs kids. Step 3, learn the homeschool laws in your state. And I believe next week the Homeschool Legal Defense Association will be talking about that. I have Washington State in my document, but if you want to know more about your own state, you can also find a statewide homeschool organization or visit Homeschool Legal Defense Association's website, which is hslda.org. Step 4, set goals for your child. These can be academic goals, but you also want to include training character and life skills as well. You want to think, what kind of person do you want your child to be at the end of their academic journey? Step 5, research learning styles. I touched on this earlier. Not only should you know how your child learns, but learn how you learn, because your two learning styles may not mesh, and that may cause trouble while you're teaching. So you'll have to learn to adapt to what your child needs. It also will help you with what kind of curricula to look for. And step 6, explore teaching methods and educational philosophy. I highly recommend that you research different educational philosophies, as this will give you direction at what type of curricula will work for you, because certain curricula follow different philosophies. Like if you don't want to do classical, but pick up a classical curriculum, that's not going to work for you. And right now, there's just a dizzying array of homeschool curricula on the market. So knowing your educational and your learning styles will help you narrow that selection. And when thinking about teaching styles, I suggest you ask these questions. Do you want an online school program that does all the work for you? Do you want a textbook or workbook that your child can work through independently and you only have to grade assignments and tests? Do you want a curriculum with just a teacher's guide that helps you instruct and interact with your child? Or do you want to be more involved by reading aloud to them, taking nature walks, field trips, and doing hands-on projects? The major education philosophies include classical, Charlotte Mason, literature-based, unit studies, the principal approach, and unschooling, also known as child-led and by various other names. I really like the idea of classical education with a little Charlotte Mason. However, due to my son's learning disabilities, he had trouble memorizing stuff, which is required in classical education. That method didn't work. So like many homeschoolers, I was eclectic in my homeschool philosophy, using pieces here and there. But I focused on materials with a biblical worldview and used many literature-based curricula and some hands-on projects. We read a lot of books in our homeschool. Step 7, write down your goals and your personal educational philosophy. By doing so, we'll keep you on track. This document will also remind you why you're homeschooling in the first place. You reference it on hard days, going, okay, this is why I decided to do this. And as time goes on, and your children get older, you'll need to tweak it or change directions from time to time. The beauty of homeschooling is its flexibility. You can choose a complete curriculum package to set your course, or bring together multiple sources together for a custom fit. Each year might be a little different, taking different directions depending on the age of your child, the availability of resources, and life circumstances. Step 8, list your subjects and select your resources. Each year, for K through 8, I used a template that listed the 11 required subjects by Washington State. And then I'd write in the curriculum or the resource I'd use to teach that subject. And then I would gather those resources together. For example, for subjects for reading, writing, and spelling, I would use one of my favorite curriculums, Spell to Write to Read. Or for PE, I signed them up for swimming lessons and gymnastics. To find resources, some of your best ways to do that is to talk to homeschoolers who share a similar educational philosophy and ask what they use. I also highly recommend Rainbow Resource Center. They have a wonderful website with really long reviews. Christianbook.com has a lot of homeschool resources with good reviews, and they do have some secular, it's not all Christian. And then Kathy Duffy reviews online. She's been reviewing for like decades, and she's got excellent reviews. Another place to go is homeschool conferences and curriculum fairs. Now, if you got big ones in your area, it can get really overwhelming, but you can also learn a lot, especially if they're workshops taught by just homeschool people, not the vendors, even though you can learn from some of the vendor workshops too. And also remember to keep costs down. You can borrow or buy used things. Sometimes you buy something that doesn't work and you want to get rid of it, so you sell it to somebody else. And I've done that. And also, as Joy mentioned, I have a family lending library in my home. I've cataloged 3,200 titles. Most of them are books, some are videos and maps and things, and I lend them out to local homeschoolers. And I do that because I want to encourage people to homeschool without the cost. And then step 9 is create a schedule. You're in charge of your school year, your vacations, your weekly schedule. You don't have to follow the school. But my kids like to take breaks the same time as their friends were. So I usually tried to line up spring break and stuff with that. And then make lesson plans. If you have a packaged curriculum, often they have that all planned out for you. But if you're cobbling different things together, you will need to decide how much you're going to do in a week or a month. And to keep track of it, you can use paper. This is a paper book I used for a while. You can use a computer. You can use software. I used to use a software called the Homeschool Tracker to keep my assignments in. Then I'd print out the weekly schedule. And when the kids were older, I would just give them the schedule and saying, this is due on Friday. You need a storage area. You need a place to be organized. It could be a bookshelf, a closet, or baskets for each child. And make sure the children learn to put stuff away. So tomorrow, Johnny isn't spending an hour looking for a book. And then also find a way to manage your assignments, especially when the kids are older, like in high school. You may not interact with them as much. And so have a place where they can turn in a paper or turn in a workbook so you can correct their work. Now, step 10, maintain records for your state or yourself. In Washington, you have to file a declaration of intent with the school district each year once the child is 8. You have to have annual test scores or assessment reports done once a year, but you just keep those. And your immunization records, which you just keep those. But when I filed to attend Running Start, my daughter had to have her immunization records turned in to enter Running Start. But you may also just want records for yourself. You may want to save a few assignments, or when my kids were with Academy Northwest, we had to create a big binder of their 4 years of work. So every semester we pulled out tests and papers and things as samples of their work. And so they have that to show what they did in high school. And in some cases with college, it might be handled good for emissions. So I know this might have been drinking from a fire hose for some of you. I hope this overview wasn't too overwhelming, and we can move on to the questions. If you got any questions about that, or if Joy, if you got any questions.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to just review just a couple of the points I think are, well, you made lots and lots of very, very good points. I think it's really important that parents remember, you mentioned the idea that you have to be educated as a teacher to teach your children. People forget that they were their kids' first teacher. and that teaching your children to talk, teaching your children to read, teaching your children to walk are all very complicated neurological functions. So if you can teach them these complicated neurological functions, I guarantee you can teach them at home. I think, I homeschooled our daughter for 1 year at her request. I wish that I had pushed back against the naysayers and done it for the entire time. And one of the things I had to get out of my own way as a former public school teacher, school does not have to look like 8 hours a day. In fact, that's counterintuitive to um, child development, to sit for 8 hours a day and try to learn and then remember it and all of that. And um, it's important to remember that there is no way that you can do worse. I'm saying this as a former public school teacher. You cannot do worse than public education is doing. It's impossible. I mean, you'd really have to try. Um, you bring gifts and talents to your homeschooling experience with your children that I think will surprise you. And you really talked about that a lot too, and finding out what your style is and how your children learn. And that is so important because in public school, they're told how they're going to learn, and those learning styles are not tapped into. They don't even teach that in teacher preparation anymore. Just
Really?
like Mm-mm. Just like many colleges across the United States do not train elementary school teachers to teach reading anymore.
I've
Um,
read
there's
that.
yeah, there's a number of
That's
colleges that are
that's
like, yeah, we don't need that anymore.
yeah,
And in
I got
addition,
this. That
oh, that
explains
is
it.
so good.
Just
That's a
read
great
that
book.
last month.
Yeah, yeah. I think that it's important that parents know exactly what is happening and have the courage to step out, because it does take courage. But finding those communities that you mentioned are so important, and
Mhm.
that's what we're here for, is to provide you with learn that I don't mean this that you're not special. I don't mean when I say that you're a real normal homeschool mom, what I mean is that you're not a vendor.
Yeah,
You're not a professional who went to a think tank. This is what worked for us. This is what I've learned from years and years of experience. What worked for my children may not be, it may be different for your children.
yeah. Kids are
And that's the
different.
joy of homeschooling. I help my friend Anne Marie homeschool because she's a single mom. And in order to make homeschooling work, she needs some help. And
Yeah, single
I
moms
love
do.
it. I don't know who gets more out of it, me or them, because I get to finally teach the way that I envisioned public school would look. Um, and it's exciting and fun. And I would love if my assistants, so to speak, from our leadership